All right. Welcome to the Graduation and Equity Webinar Series. I'm Kepi Anderson, System Improvement Program Supervisor Lead, and today we are talking about a systemic approach to supporting anti-racist school climate practices. This meeting's being recorded. It should be available today on YouTube. We have closed captions that are available in the menu if you want to take advantage of that. And we'll drop our PowerPoint into the chat in just a little bit so that you can take advantage of that as well. This webinar is brought to you through the Office of Student Engagement and Supports at the Office of the Superintendent of Public Instruction. At OSPI, we believe each student needs to be prepared for post-secondary pathways, careers, and civic engagement. The Graduation Equity Webinar Series was created with the purpose of highlighting practices that increase access to education and ultimately to graduation. Through our webinars, we're striving to examine and dismantle current policies and practices that result in disparate outcomes for our students, with the ultimate goal of ensuring that each student has access to the instruction and support that will make them successful in school and in life. I want to share with you this ancestral lands map. We live in just such a beautiful place, and fall is actually my favorite season. So if you're a gardener, I hope your harvest is looking promising and that you're enjoying some of our native staples. I've been looking forward to squash soup myself. And we ask that the participants of this meeting also honor the traditional lands on which each of you are located today. You can check out our resource sheet in a minute for a link to look at where you are specifically. In my life, I mostly travel around the intersection of the traditional lands of the Squaxin Island, the Coast Salish, the Cowlitz, and the Nisqually tribes. And I'd like to acknowledge the Indigenous people who have stewarded this land since time immemorial and who still live here today. And we'd like to connect you to our Office of Native Education if you'd like to learn more about tribal consultation. It's a really great way to get to know your local tribes and begin those relationships that benefit students and families. And I see in the chat, we've got Chehalis, we've got Spokane, we've got some Coast Salish. Yeah, welcome, y'all. Glad to see you this morning. We chose to talk about anti-racist school climate practices because it's been weighing on our hearts a lot this last year, and it's also been requested a lot in our feedback surveys as a topic that's particularly relevant to you. Racism's often pervasive, it's structural, it's fueled by that implicit bias, and honestly, it's really uncomfortable to talk about most of the time. And I think if you're uncomfortable with what you're seeing out in the window to the world, that's a good place to start. And that's when you know you've got an opportunity to also see your reflection there and just really grow. I do want to say out loud, we're talking about race today, and we hope that it's helpful. And also, we're not perfect, so we don't always know how what we say will hit. So if you need to step out to take care of yourself, we totally understand. We do want to encourage some courageous conversations. We are all in different places with race, and that's okay, but taking a step is taking a step. So even if it's just asking the right question, we hope it's helpful. Ruth Bader Ginsburg once said, fight for the things that you care about, but do it in a way that will lead others to join you. So I hope that's what we are doing today. By joining us today, we hope that you learn what the law says about bullying and harassment and what your responsibility is to respond. We'll talk about some of the foundational practices for creating a positive school climate. We want to share with you a data visualization tool that you can use to assess disproportionality at your school. And you'll hear from Puget Sound ESD about how they're supporting schools in this work, and they've brought with them Edmonds Oak Heights Elementary So you'll also hear lessons learned from some really awesome folks that have made an impact on disproportionality. I'm joined today by my awesome colleagues from OSPI. Sarah Albertson is our managing attorney in our Office of Equity and Civil Rights, as well as Tanya May, our assistant superintendent of special education. And we have Dua Ka, OSPI student behavior support program supervisor. And we'll introduce you to our panel just a little bit later. Super glad y'all could be here today. These are some smart folks, so I think they'll have really good things to say. We do like to know who is in our audience each month, just so that we are, so we're checking in with your needs and making sure that we're aligning to the audience we have with us. We tend to ask for your role, your grade band, and how familiar you are with our topic. And right now in our audience, I'm seeing a lot of school counselors, a lot of folks in that administrator band. We have a fair amount of district office folks. Looks like we have a lot of middle, high school, and both grade bands going on. And people are, there's a very small number of people who say it's a new topic to them. People feel like they are somewhat familiar, and there's maybe 46 folks right now who say they're very familiar with this topic. So I think that we have an opportunity to talk about it pretty in depth. That's great. Let's go to this next slide. And if you didn't get a chance to answer the poll, that's okay. We just wanted to get a sample, and that should be shared out with you if you're curious to look at it. We are going to go to Sarah next. We want to ground our conversation today in a school's legal responsibility. So Sarah's going to tell us a little bit about the law and how you can respond when things happen at your school. Welcome, Sarah.
Thanks, Kathy. Hi, everyone. My name is Sarah Albertson. I work with OSPI's Equity and Civil Rights Office. Our office works to ensure that each student has equal access to public education without discrimination. So for the next few minutes, we are going to be focusing on what I consider to be a central aspect to supporting an anti-racist school climate, and that is what civil rights laws require school districts to do to eliminate bullying and harassment that is based on race, which we also call discriminatory harassment. So I know that there are a lot of different folks here in different roles. I'm going to be talking a lot about your school district's responsibilities. So please don't take this as this is your individual responsibility, but it's a collective district responsibility. Racial bias and harassment is one of the most common school-related civil rights issues that we see in complaints to OSPI and also in the local news. And as we dig into these issues with our communities and school leaders, we learn that they are rarely isolated events. They are dangerous, disturbing, disruptive, and not only for the students who are targeted, but also for the broader school community, other students, staff members, parents, and families who witness the incidents or experience them in school culture broadly. So to support an anti-racist school climate, school and district leaders need to take harassment and racism seriously and actively work to prevent it. So first, let's talk about what types of behaviors and incidents we are referring to. Discrimination and bias can take many forms. What we're going to be focusing on in the next few minutes is specifically racial bias and harassment. From verbal insults to physical assault, the range of behaviors can vary, but all have serious impacts on the safety and well-being of students, staff, and families in the broader community. I'm going to share a couple of examples from Washington, of course, not intending to identify any specific district. And these examples can be triggering, so please feel free to step away if you need to, or to mute the sound. But I'll start with a disturbing trend that we do see here in Washington is that sporting events, visiting athletes who are Black being met with chants of monkey noises from the crowd whenever they get the ball. We've seen in these events that video is often taken during the game and shared widely on social media and in local news. And families and students who see this across the district also begin raising their own concerns about ongoing bias and discrimination that they themselves have experienced in school. At another school in Washington, Black and African American students reported hearing the N-word or being called the N-word nearly on a daily basis, in the halls, in the classroom, on the way to school. And when teachers or adults at school overhear it, all they say is to knock it off. In that same school district, we heard of at least 2 separate incidents occurring in that school year where Black students were physically assaulted at school while the assailants were hurling racial slurs at them. And parents and community leaders in this district were sending complaints to the school, to the district leaders, asking for intervention. However, they were met with little response, few commitments to address the concerns beyond disciplining the aggressors. We also hear about anti-Semitic incidents with swastika graffiti or so-called jokes about the Holocaust. And we've been seeing more and more Asian American students reporting bullying, bias, other hate incidents based on race and stigma related to the pandemic. These are just examples that we see, a few of the examples that we see here in Washington. You may be familiar with more, either from your own experiences in school or from the media. But please do keep these examples in mind. State and federal civil rights laws outline very specific requirements for school districts to respond to these types of incidents or discriminatory harassment. So we're going to next look at that specific definition of what is discriminatory harassment and what the specific requirements are for responding to it. So harassment is a form of discrimination when it is based on a protected class and creates a hostile environment. There are a couple of terms of art here. A protected class refers to a group of people who share common characteristics, and they are protected from discrimination under state and federal law. Today, we're focusing on race or color as a protected class here in Washington, but we do have many more protected classes in Washington that you need to be aware of, and that this same framework applies to. So that includes national origin, religion, sexual orientation, gender identity expression, disability, and there's many others as well. So hostile environment. Harassment creates a hostile environment when the conduct is so severe, persistent, or pervasive that it affects a student's ability to participate in or benefit at school. That is what we define as discriminatory harassment in civil rights laws. It's also important to consider behaviors that might not rise to this level of harassment, but what we would call a bias incident. It could be a casual or isolated incident, and that alone may not rise to the level of discriminatory harassment, but schools should still take it seriously. For one, anti-racist schools should have zero tolerance for racial bias incidents. And in our professional experience, we see that these truly isolated incidents are rare. Usually there is a lot more going on. A lack of response to these types of incidents from school leaders or trusted adults at school can damage relationships with students and families and may embolden more behavior. So while civil rights laws require specific response to incidents that rise to the level of harassment, I really encourage you to think more broadly about the other incidents that may be occurring. Here's what civil rights laws require for responding to possible discriminatory harassment. When a school knows or should know about harassment, it needs to investigate to determine what occurred, stop the harassment, eliminate the hostile environment, and prevent it from recurring. This investigation must be prompt, thorough, and impartial. It's collecting facts to learn what happened, who was involved, Where did it occur? How often did it occur? And what impact did it have on students who were targeted? But even while this investigation is ongoing, schools also need to make sure they are taking steps to ensure any harassment stops. This will likely involve putting some interim measures in place to keep students separated and safe at school. But any measures really should minimize the burden on the targeted students. Please do not ask that students who were targeted stay home from school. It's something that we do hear about from time to time. Instead, we encourage you to put supports in place that ensure students are safe while they are at school and able to still access education. In addition to stopping harassment, any hostile environment needs to be eliminated and prevented from recurring. This is why it's so important that your district's investigation understand the impact of the behavior that it had on students involved and also the broader school community. Without understanding the impact, a hostile environment can't appropriately be addressed. So for students who were targeted, find out what it is they need to feel safe and welcome at school. But also consider what it is they might have missed while they were experiencing harassment. They may need tutoring to help them get caught up, or the opportunity to make up missed assignments or retake tests. And as I've been saying, and we'll say a few more times, discriminatory harassment is rarely isolated. So the broader school community may also be experiencing a hostile environment that needs to be addressed. It's not a small task, but it's crucial and it will require, in most cases, work related to school climate, student and parent engagement, and staff and student training. We get a lot of questions about bullying and harassment that occurs in social media or over the weekend, so I wanted to be sure to mention it. This is a really tricky issue for sure, but here's the bottom line. Discriminatory harassment is not protected First Amendment speech. And even though it may be happening off campus, or it's difficult to discern whether it's happening at school because it's happening on social media, your school may still need to address it. First, if the conduct happens off campus but is still related to a school activity, like a football game, a field trip, on the school bus, your district needs to approach this as if it happened on school grounds. And if you can't tell whether it's occurring at school because it's on social media, or it occurs perhaps over the weekend off campus, your school still needs to address any hostile environment that is following students into the school building so that they're not experiencing discrimination while they're at school. At this point, you may be wondering about where the harassment, intimidation, and bullying, or HIB policy fits in, because doesn't this behavior fall within that? And the answer is yes, it does. It's one of the reasons this is so tricky for school districts in Washington is our state has multiple controlling laws and procedures that overlap here. I do think it's clearer if we look at the processes side by side. Although maybe not totally clear. You may already be familiar with HIB, but as a reminder, in Washington law, school districts also have an obligation to respond to harassment, intimidation, and bullying behaviors of all kinds, whether it is based on protected class or not. But responding to your HIB policy is not enough to ensure discriminatory harassment is appropriately addressed. And this is because your school district's legal obligations to respond are governed by different federal and state laws, as well as different local district policies and procedures. And inconveniently, these legal obligations and procedures do not align well. There are different timelines. For example, with a HIB complaint, a school has 5 days to investigate and respond, whereas with a discrimination complaint, a district has 30 full calendar days to investigate and respond. And it might not be the case every time, but HIB procedures envision that a lot of HIB incidents can be resolved at a school level. And the response may be limited to disciplining students who were aggressors and supporting students who were targeted. But on the other hand, with discriminatory harassment, because it involves a hostile environment, it's often a systemic issue in the school or district, a systemic response is needed. And so for this reason, state law requires that district intervention and response to allegations of discrimination must occur. With that in mind, you need to be aware at the school of when a HIB complaint could be alleging discrimination, like the examples that we discussed earlier. And if that's the case, then a HIB complaint or a HIB investigation may not be enough. If you learn from a HIB complaint or an investigation that the bullying incident may have been based on race, or race was involved or a motivating factor, then your school district needs to use both its HIB procedure and its non-discrimination procedure to respond to ensure that you are addressing any discrimination in hostile environment. Who's responsible for this? Every school district and charter school in Washington has a civil rights coordinator. This is a designated staff person, usually at the district level, who manages your district civil rights compliance and responds to questions and complaints from families. If you are a building leader and these issues arise, please do not try to take it on alone, but ensure that your civil rights coordinator is involved. So just to reiterate, to use both procedures to respond, both HIB and non-discrimination. So let's talk about the civil rights coordinator for a moment. Given the important role of the civil rights coordinator in this process, take a moment to check in. And do you know who your civil rights coordinator is? There is a poll that just popped up, so I'll give you a moment to respond to that.
Yeah, and Sarah, it looks like there's a lot of people who are saying yes, but there's an equal amount of people who are saying, I don't know.
Okay.
There you go.
Thank you, Kefi. If your response is yes, awesome. I encourage you to reach out to your coordinator to check in with them on what is your district's process? How are you taking preventative steps on discriminatory harassment, and how do you respond? If your answer is I don't know, please do find out. This person should have their contact information widely publicized, including in your district's non-discrimination statement, which is the little statement that you will find on most of your publications and notices. If any of you responded that you are the coordinator or that you are both the HIB and the civil rights coordinator, thank you so much for serving in those roles. It's not easy, especially with other full-time jobs. It looks like no one in this group is both those coordinators. If you know who your coordinator is, please encourage them to reach out. Equity and Civil Rights Office is available to provide technical assistance to coordinators or to anyone listening in today on these issues, and we'd be thrilled to hear from them. Our office has worked with several districts in this situation where discriminatory harassment incidents have occurred and they are in a state of crisis in their community. In addition to the legal requirements that we just talked about, we do encourage them to be thinking about how their response can be effective and aimed at healing within the school community. And here are a few of the things we do recommend, but for time, I will just touch on a few. And first is to be sure to consider impacts on the school community. These incidents rarely happen in isolation, so be sure your response is aimed at both addressing the immediate incident and the students involved, but also systemic concerns. It's important to understand that for many students and families and staff members, these incidents can make them feel unsafe or unwelcome at school. And this is true even if they are not the immediate target. As you're working through an incident or a crisis like this, students and families may use this opportunity to raise additional concerns about racism, discrimination, or other bias. And the district needs to be prepared to respond to all those concerns promptly and thoroughly. Also, we really do encourage schools and districts to embrace your community partners. Groups like the NAACP or parent groups, faith groups in the community. These groups and local leaders are keyed in to the communities that they serve and represent, and they will be able to share a lot more about what the concerns of the communities are and they'll have really good ideas for how your district can promote healing and stronger relationships moving forward. And from everything that you've learned from the experience, this is time to revisit your policies and systems to make sure that you have the appropriate measures in place to prevent and respond to incidents, which could include having tracking and reporting systems in place, but will almost always include robust staff and student training. And I will end with this. The very best approach to bullying and harassment is prevention. The quote on the slide is a school climate that encourages inclusion and promotes tolerance does not guarantee that bias incidents won't happen. Instead, it creates an atmosphere in which these acts are less likely to gain momentum and are more likely to be quickly and widely denounced. This quote is from a Learning for Justice guide called Responding to Hate and Bias in School. I think it's included in the resources for today, but this guide goes into a lot more detail on what school districts and school leaders can do before, during, and after a bias or hate incident crisis occurs. So I strongly encourage you to look at it. And next, Dua is going to be talking a lot more about a positive school climate, which really is key to this prevention. So I'm going to leave it to them for more information. And with that, thank you. I know this is a lot of information very quickly. My office is going to be doing a much deeper dive into discriminatory harassment through a webinar in November. So I encourage you to join us for that if you're interested.
Thank you so much, Sarah, for explaining the context of the laws for us and just how important it is that we protect our students, families, and communities, and that we're being proactive about these instead of just being reactive. So thank you so much, Sarah. Hi everyone, I'm Dua Kha. I'm the Student Behavior Support Program Supervisor at OSPI. And when we ensure that our schools is anti-racist, we are ultimately hoping to create a positive school climate for every child. However, that is a broad term. So what do we mean when we say a positive school climate? So school climate refers to the quality and character of school life. And a sustainable school climate has three things. The first one is engagement, to build a strong and positive relationship with our students, our families, and our community, and making sure that these are grounded in the cultural and linguistic competence of them. The second one is safety, where students feel safe to participate in schools and activities away from violence, bullying, harassment, and controlled substance abuse. And third is environment, where students have access to appropriate facilities, culturally sustaining classrooms, multiple available school-based health supports, and a clear and fair disciplinary policy. So these are just some examples of practices that can promote a positive school climate. So one example of a universal approach would be using multiple data sources to inform practices, such as a culturally responsive school-wide positive behavior interventions and supports. A more targeted approach would be having small learning communities and mentorship. And one way to do this is having cultural and racial affinity groups so that students feel a more structured support. And then a more personalized approach may be to incorporate students and family when designing personalized plans such as behavior or academic support plans and progress monitoring to ensure that their needs are being met responsibly and equitably. So these are just some quick wins to get started. The first one is always to provide a clear and accurate definitions of racism for consumers of the policy when designing them. So that way everybody is on the same page of what we mean when we say racism, anti-racism. Two would be to devise a plan for a policy dissemination to ensure that these are accessible for students, family, and community members to read and understand. 3 would be appointing an anti-racist committee or point person and making sure that this is collaborative so that we are getting multiple voices in on the matter. 4 would be when creating your equity or anti-racist policy, make sure that you're aligning this with other district-wide or school-wide policies, such as our discipline behavior and anti-bullying harassment forms, to make sure that there is alignment to see how they do impact one another. And the last one, we always encourage partnering with external organizations and community, again, to learn more from and with these experts. So our third poll today is, does your school or district have an anti-racist or equity policies?
All right. It's looking like a lot of people are saying yes. We have about 63% say yes, but there's about 21% who don't know.
Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah. So if you don't know, I encourage you to find out and ask where they are at and to look them over so that everybody has an understanding of what is actually in the anti-racist or equity policies. And if you also want to ensure that you're understanding it, maybe reach out to the point person of your district or school and ask questions from and with them. And I believe that should be the end of my session. And then I will pass it on to Tanya May, who will be discussing about a tool for scanning your system to identify and disrupt disproportionality.
Thanks, Dua, and thank you to our graduation equity partners and to all of you for joining us. What I wanted to talk with you a little bit about today is that intersection of race and ability. When we think about anti-racist school practices and school climate, something that we want to be really tuned into is what and how is our system responding to student need? And we know that special education is an attempt to provide additional supports for students. So I'm going to be talking a little bit about a tool that's available for you all to think about the concept of disproportionality, which is a measure of that intersectionality between race and ability. So let's dig in. So I wanted to start with just a snapshot of some of our state data around special education, again, through that lens of looking at race and ability. So when we start to dig into the performance of all students, pre-K through grade 12, and then compare that with our students with disabilities and their access points and opportunity gaps, we also want to be thinking about individual populations, so like our Black students with disabilities. And there are bright spots that we can pull out, and then there are also patterns where we have more concern. So as an example, what we're going to think a little bit about today is the experiences of students with Black students with disabilities from the time they enter the school system, their experience throughout, and as they're preparing to leave our school system. And what we see is that from the beginning, Black students with disabilities are experiencing opportunity gaps, and that pattern continues as they're thinking about graduation. We've been on a journey in Washington and really thinking about access to general education. And so you may have heard of the Inclusionary Practices Project. And what we want to be thinking about is the impact that has across all of these same populations. So we have about 100 school districts that we've been following since the beginning of this project. And we've seen just incredible change in those systems in terms of one particular data point. It is the amount of general education that a student with a disability has access to in the school day. So we're looking at 80 to 100% of their school day. Our state data is moving a little bit more slowly, although still significant in terms of a statewide level. But when we look at our Black students with disabilities, they already had access to general education at a lower rate than our state data. And they've had a slower gain throughout this project. So the gap is actually widening for our Black students with disabilities in terms of their access to general education. So that right there is an introduction to disproportionality. And I wanted to start by defining it in terms of how we use it in the special education field. So what we know of our data is that students with disabilities in Washington are more likely to be male, from BIPOC communities, and experiencing poverty. And as a state, we are federally required to evaluate and address district-level disproportionality in special education related to identification, placement, and discipline of students with IEPs. And we have to think about that by race and ethnicity. So the way that it gets measured is through a risk ratio. And so that is how we determine disproportionality. And that's a measure of the likelihood that students from a particular race or ethnicity will be identified or placed in a particular category compared with all other students. So let's unpack that a little bit. A risk ratio of 1.0 is neutral. It means that students from that race or ethnicity group are as likely as all other students to be eligible or placed into that particular category. A risk ratio over 1.0 represents potential overrepresentation. So for example, a risk ratio of 4.0 means that students from that group are 4 times as likely as all other students to be placed in that category. And we also have a concept of potential underrepresentation, right? Less than 1.0. So if we have a risk ratio of 0.5, it means that that group is half as likely as all other students to be identified or placed in that category. So if you have your phones handy, you can scan this QR code. We are also sharing all of these slides so you have access to it, but it might come in handy if you want to use this with your own teams. We wanted to share some sample data, and it comes from one of our data tools, the Least Restrictive Environment data platform. And so you may be familiar with that tool in terms of looking at access to general education. But there's also a tab in there that will help your team dive into the risk ratios in a particular building, in a group of schools, at a district level, or even aggregated up to a region or the state. So that platform, it was designed to provide you all with unsuppressed building level special education data. So it includes demographic data about your students, and then also some outcome data and placement data. And what I'm going to be diving into with you today are the risk ratio calculations. So if you haven't heard of this, or you would like to get access to it, if you have a school, district, or ESD email, you can get access to the platform by emailing specialeddata@k12.wa.us. Your district's special education director also has access to this platform at any time, so they can download it through their federal fund application for special ed funds. So let's look at a little bit of sample data. So the first display that we have here is from an elementary school. And so in this first part, what you would do is either pull up the data display, or there's a tool that will allow you to enter your own data. And you just put in the breakdown of all students in the building across the different racial and ethnic categories. And so that'll break down the percentage of those race and ethnicity groups within that building. The next level is to look at, across those same race and ethnicities, the number of students who are receiving special education services or have an IEP. And then it will auto-calculate for you the risk ratio. And so if we do a quick review, 1.0 is neutral. Anything over 1.0 is potential overrepresentation in that category. Anything under 1.0 is potential underrepresentation. And because we want to be thinking about this across trends and multiple years, I have a simplified view here, but that data tool will go back for 3 years of data. So we know it's just as important to be thinking about this at the secondary level. So I also have an example from a high school building that has a much larger population, so the N sizes are bigger. But we can still look at that potential overrepresentation. We can look at our students who are American Indian and students with disabilities who are Black in this school. So some of the questions that we encourage teams to think about when thinking about disproportionality is, when you're looking at these data points and these risk ratios, which groups experienced a risk ratio over 2.0? How about over 3.0? Were there any that were under 1.0? And for which groups has the ratio been over 2.0 or under 1.0 for 2 consecutive years? Or maybe 3 consecutive years. And then as we think about that 3-year span, have certain groups been experiencing an increasing risk ratio? Have some shown a decreasing risk ratio? So why do we do this, right? Why is this important? As Sarah and Dua were both talking, climate really matters, and it impacts what activities happen, right? What actions are happening, how people interpret those, and what the responses might be. And so what we know is that referrals for special education come from a good place. They come with the best of intentions. We have staff, families, partners who are observing that there's a student need and they want to explore ways to support those students. Disproportionality is a way for us to measure and think about that adult response to student needs across those multiple identities. So in this case, race and ability. And what I really hope that we can all keep in mind is that even when we have those really good intentions, adult decisions can result in harm to students when those actions do not address the true root causes of student need and or are not culturally affirming. What we know from the research is that once a student is identified with a disability and has an IEP, they start to experience multiple systemic barriers. Some of that can be low expectations. I don't know how many of you have sat in an initial IEP meeting when they're first looking at whether a student's going to be eligible for special education. But as you can imagine from my role, I have sat in many, many of those meetings over the past several decades. And sometimes there's this collective sigh of relief, student's eligible. And what I start to ask in those situations is, where is that relief coming from? Is it because we feel that the pressure's off? Because I would hope that the pressure's even higher, right? We want to be making up time by having additional services. And then we've also been talking today that we know that we have disproportionate identification, segregation, and disciplinary action of our students of color. There are also some barriers that are more at the systems level. So once a student is eligible for special education, there are times that they start to have less access and opportunity to core instruction from the content experts and from their general education teachers. We sometimes have school schedules that contribute to removal from core instruction, particularly at the secondary level. And then there are even wider structural impacts that are beyond the school and district level, ongoing teacher and staff shortages, and then training needs for kind of all of our school staff and partners. And we can have staffing and funding ratios and models that also can contribute to segregation of students with disabilities. So our question then is how, regardless of our role, and we have a wide variety of partners here with us today, how can we, from where we are, lead to remove and reduce those barriers? So some ways that we can think about this when we're thinking about anti-racist practices and school climate is really digging into, if we're looking at a particular race or ethnicity group that has a higher risk ratio than other groups, what types of pre-referral interventions were provided to those students before they were referred to special education? How long were those interventions provided and who provided them? What types of progress data were collected and analyzed before that referral? And what rate of progress did the students experience? And then really coming back to the heart work that this needs. What existing biases and beliefs could be contributing to the opportunity gaps that students of color are experiencing, which might lead to potential over-referral for special education? In what ways are those biases disrupted through engagement with staff, families, and interactions with the students themselves that affirm racial, linguistic, and cultural identities? So my hope is that this gives you some new avenues to explore in your schools, your school districts, the regions that you support. We're happy to share some of these data tools with you. And some of the questions that I shared today around how to really dig into the root causes of this, we just scratched the surface. We have, through our OSPI Special Education Office, a variety of self-study tools and interactive materials that we're happy to walk through with you to lead some data discussions. So I really hope that you'll reach out to our office so that we can partner with you. And I'm really excited that now I think we're going to transition to our panel discussion and really dive into how some of our ESD and school district partners are engaging in this conversation.
Well, and Tanya, before you go, I think we're going to go to the Q&A and just check in with Jocelyn. I think we've been getting some questions.
Oh, great. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
We've got a couple questions. How do you analyze disproportionality using the risk ratio if the N size is very small because it creates large variability in the risk ratio?
Sure. And that's a very fair question. So in terms of an actual designation of, you have disproportionate data, we wouldn't make that designation if it was a very small N size. And so the data tool that we shared talks a little bit about that N size is important to think about. It's still worthy of exploration because if we can start to see patterns and think about the reason that those patterns might be there, we can start to disrupt it. But I think that's a very important point around thinking about how when we have a very small group, the percentages can swing widely.
Thanks, Tanya. The next question, has there been a cross tabulation between attendance and disproportionate racial equity data?
That's probably not the best question for me. What we do, I believe that we have attendance data that is disaggregated. So some of that's available in the state report card. I'm wondering if there's a question about this building level risk ratio compared to attendance data. That's not included in the data tool that we have, but it's actually a really good suggestion. We're always thinking about how we can make the tool more responsive year over year.
And one last question. Isn't there a sigh of relief because there are not a lot of resources, programs, staff available to address the root cause in a meaningful way?
It could be that. I think it's also that, and I tried to acknowledge this at the beginning. When a team gets to the point of referral, it's sometimes because they've exhausted all of the things they knew how to try, right? There's evidence when we talk with our school systems that there are interventions being implemented before referral. And I think that we're all always trying to learn better about the extent to which those interventions that we're trying are culturally affirming and are responsive to the needs of our individual students kind of across their multiple identities.
Great. Thank you, Tanya.
Thanks, everybody.
And thanks, audience, for your questions. I know that it's a really interesting tool, I think, and just to be able to see kind of that global scan of where your data is a good asset. It's a great place to start. So if you are thinking about checking it out and you need some help, we're going to encourage you to get in contact too. So we wanted to bring you some folks who are working on this on the ground. And so we've brought with us today, we've got Erin Stewart, and she is a Special Services Director from Puget Sound Educational Service District. Erin has done a lot of work with schools who are working on this topic, and she's also an adjunct professor for education prep programs in Washington State. A really great resource for the work. We also have with us Jessie Asp. She is a principal at Oak Heights Elementary School in Edmonds School District, and her assistant principal, Katie Shook, with us today. Welcome, y'all. We are so glad to have you. And I think we wanted to start off our conversation today just kind of looking at Erin's work with Puget Sound Educational Service District. So Erin's a leader in the discussion, and Erin, what does that look like? Like, what are you working with schools to do? What's your approach from the ESD side?
Yeah, thank you, Keffi. And I also just want to say thank you, Tanya, for sharing an overview of the definition of disproportionality, information on the intersection of race and ability, and really grounding us in that importance of examining and addressing issues of disproportionality in special education. And I really appreciated Tanya's framing that this work is aimed at exploring and really addressing the adult actions and beliefs in our school settings that do perpetuate those inequities. And that really aligns with the way that we're approaching this work, or the work that we do with schools and districts around disproportionality in special education. And before I dive into some of that work that our team's doing and share some resources, I have some additional resources to share. I do want to just provide a little bit of background about how we're approaching this work with districts. And so the work our team does with schools and districts to examine and address root causes of disproportionality in special education is really grounded in the understanding that beliefs and assumptions, policies and procedures, and practices all influence inequities. And we can't just focus on one aspect alone, because they're all interconnected. And at the root of all of this is really our biases and our assumptions. And I mean that at all levels. It's personal, collective, and institutional. And Tanya provided some great examples of some of those barriers that really are operating that can contribute to these inequities. And often, I think one of our first steps as education systems is to find a technical solution. Maybe it's a new policy or a new discipline procedure. Maybe it's a new compliance task or a set of practices that we're thinking about implementing. And not that those aren't important in this process and necessary, but often when we jump quickly to those technical solutions, we're not really accounting for social, political, some of the cultural, and the historical factors that are really at the basis of our education system. And so this leap to the technical solutions also may not integrate input from our communities that are most impacted by disproportionality, and may not actually be fully getting at the true root causes of disproportionality. And so as I share some resources today, I really am going to hone in on how do we examine and understand the root causes in our system. And some of the work that we do with leaders is really focusing also on those adaptive leadership skills that are needed to lead this work. And when we talk about adaptive leadership, we're talking about moves that are really grounded in vulnerability, continual learning and growth, and then ongoing reflection, which I think can be new and scary sometimes for leaders. And so that's a place where we aim to provide support. And for us, building those skills includes really building the capacity to lead shifts in building cultures, to really adopt strategies that uplift and center the voices and wisdom of Black, Indigenous students and families of color, and also to support educators with examining and challenging some of those long-held and often deficit-based beliefs and assumptions that we've been socialized into. And so at Puget Sound DSD, when we're working with districts around disproportionality and special education, we understand that it's totally contextual because the work is really grounded in culture, identity, history, and the actions and the process that one school takes may not directly apply to the root causes or context at another school. And so our work is often individualized and tailored to the district or the school that we're working with. And we partner with educators and leaders in several different ways to really understand and address disproportionality in their contexts. For example, we currently facilitate a professional learning network that's focused on technical and adaptive leadership skills that are needed to really examine data, identify root causes, and design strategies and plans to address disproportionality. And in this network, because we're focused on adaptive leadership, we're also exploring these issues of intersectionality. As facilitators, we're modeling vulnerability and what it looks like to reflect on how our identities are impacting our work and those that we work with. And then we also invite, our community that's joining us in these professional learning spaces to share in that reflection on the work that they're currently doing in their contexts. We also partner directly with districts and buildings to provide technical assistance and serve as thought partners as they really engage in this process of identifying their root causes and designing strategies and plans to address them. And then we'll also soon be launching a project to work directly with schools that have been identified through WISF for Tier 1 targeted supports for students with disabilities. And this project will include really creating a community of practice and targeted support that really is focused on supporting schools with collecting asset-based student-level data to truly understand their entire system and the impact on students with disabilities and their families. And we're going to be using the book Street Data by Shane Shafir and Jamila Duggan and Cycles of Inquiry as anchors in this work that we do with our school partners. And so, Kathy, if you could share that slide with resources. So I want to just share a handful of tools or resources that can support districts and schools in this process of truly understanding their root cause. And again, every school or district will have a different entry point as they begin to review available data, identify what data is missing, what's needed, and to really use strategies to collect the data that's going to support them with understanding their root cause. And as I mentioned, our work really focuses on coming alongside our district and school partners to support them in building authentic partnerships with families and collecting a broad range of data to understand the factors that are contributing to disproportionality. And so the first resource that I want to share is really the foundation for this work, and it comes from the National Center for Systemic Improvement. And it really supports schools and districts with assessing their current norms for partnering with Black, Indigenous communities of color. And it's not a checklist, but a reflection tool that can support teams with really looking at their current practice and shifting some of their mindsets and practices to really foster authentic partnerships that are needed to do this work with our families and students. And when we think about a root cause analysis and we're working with districts, I like to think about it as a continual process of really getting deeper and closer to the direct impact on students and families. So that we can truly understand what factors are contributing to disproportionality and disparate outcomes. And so the next 4 tools that you're seeing really do focus on collecting a broad range of data sources so that we can really explore all the various facets of our system that are impacting students. And so Tanya shared a data tool which can give a really broad picture of the experience of different racial and ethnic groups in special education by looking at risk ratios. And from there, the work for districts and schools is to really use those risk ratios and that data that's present in that tool as this launching point to continue zooming in on the student experience to truly understand what beliefs and assumptions, policies and procedures, and the practices that are contributing to disproportionality. And so the first tool comes from OSPI's self-study guide that Tanya mentioned. It is a section of the tool that asks teams to closely examine the special education files of the student groups most impacted by our current systems, policies, and practices. So it guides teams with really examining the current beliefs and dispositions, the procedures and practices for pre-referral and referral and evaluation, and then placement for students who have been identified or referred for special education. So this is a method for starting to surface some of those factors that may be leading to over-identification and more restrictive placements for specific student groups. So the culturally and linguistically responsive response to intervention rubric also provides a starting point for systems to really self-assess the cultural and linguistic responsiveness of their MTSS systems and their decision-making process. And as I said, it can serve as this launching point for teams to really explore different aspects of their procedures, practices, and assumptions about students that may be contributing to over or under identification. I think it's also a helpful reflection tool for teams to really closely examine the culturally responsiveness of their evaluation methods and their assessments to identify potential assessment bias in their process. And then the final tools that I'll share can really support teams with understanding the student experience and their assets. And both of these data collection tools can help teams really understand how a student may experience aspects of the school environment. And so the first is a protocol for conducting empathy interviews that can and should be adapted to fully understand the student's experience and the perceptions of their strengths and barriers in your specific context. And the other is a data collection activity that really involves shadowing a student to truly understand how they're experiencing the classroom culture, instruction, and interactions. And it does really support educators with seeing or experiencing or learning about the student's experience within a classroom or within the school setting. And so by no means are these the tools to use in this process of really digging into root causes. But I do hope that they can support some of you with starting the process, exploring potential root causes of disproportionality in your context. And again, I just want to restate that this work, can't solely rely on these technical approaches or even the technical tools that I just shared. We have to be doing that personal, interpersonal, and collective work to really scrutinize and address our own biases and assumptions that perpetuate a lot of these inequities. And so with that, I don't know, Kefi, are you going to introduce?
Yeah. Thank you, Erin. And I just want to reiterate, like, these tools are so cool, and Puget Sound ESD has put in so much time into creating them and vetting them with multiple teams that they're asking such great questions. And I just want to encourage y'all to check out the links today and just look at one and challenge your team to look at them and think about them a little more deeply. I do want to kind of go over to Edmonds over here. We've got Oak Heights Elementary, and Jesse and Katie. I mean, your school has just done some really cool work around disproportionality. And I wanted to give you a chance just to share your story of what did that look like? What got you started? So tell us about it.
Yeah, thanks for having us. So our story kind of, was a unique story, but similar story to a lot of schools, where in 2018-2019 school year, Katie and I came on as administrators, and our school was identified by the state as targeted for disproportionate outcomes for our multilingual students, our special ed students, and our students of color. And so that was the catalyst to really change the way that we're doing school here at Oak Heights. With that, our school went through cycles of inquiry and looking at our root causes. And through that, we're able to determine quite a few factors that were playing into these outcomes for our families, from inconsistent practices, curriculum use, inconsistent PD, collaborative time. But ultimately, we got to that really fine point where we're looking at inconsistent values and beliefs around students. And that was kind of one of our huge factors that we're looking at for root causes for the outcomes that our families are experiencing. And that kind of led us to the journey that we've been going on now. And through that, we as a school have been working really hard to focus our why on focusing on our BIPOC communities and families, our most marginalized students and communities, and through the lens of anti-racism, look at everything that we're doing. And that has been multiple years of ongoing work. And that is still going on now because it is it's deeply embedded into our school system. So we started out not only looking at just, our systems and our practices, but we knew, just like Erin was talking about, until we as a school really looked at internal values and beliefs around race, culture, and school, and what school should be like or what should look like, we wouldn't really ever be able to help our families have equitable access and equitable opportunities for success. So we've done a variety of things that have started with that adult and that staff mindset first. And historically in schools, you always have like an equity group or optional opportunities you could do to do some learning if it felt like it interested you. But we realized that through our root cause that we needed everyone to have the opportunity for common learning, common understanding, common times to really dig deep and have these often vulnerable and uncomfortable conversations about race and culture and beliefs. So we've started to change our system so those weren't opt-in or opt-out opportunities. So with like a lot of schools, I think that started out looking at that culturally responsive lens and really zooming into Zaretta Hammond's work. And that got us so far. And it was like after that point where George Floyd's murder came into place, it became our community and our staff and our families were like, at that point, we're like, we are clearly not doing enough. So our school and a lot of our staff within our school became even more impassioned to dig deeper, like, and do more. So we started to dig deeper as a school community, of course, going into work with Ibram X. Kendi and reading those books, Cornelia Minor, Bettina Love, doing a lot of studies, and then taking core groups of staff to go out and do workshops with Joe Truss on anti-racist educators, and really digging into white supremacy culture characteristics and bringing that learning back full school. And so over the last few years, in our shared common professional development time, our staff meeting time, we always build in time to examine, look at the work of examining our biases, how those might play out as microaggressions, how our systems within our school might be inherently racist that we haven't examined in for multiple years. So we've been really digging deep as a staff. And then in that same time period, we started really trying to have intentional outreach with our families and our communities, not only for our students, but providing that perception data around social emotional and their experience. We've done some affinity groups and focus groups with families to have some listening sessions to hear their lived experience of our school, as well as just having that ongoing, trying to rebuild trust for families that have had often not great experiences in their own experience growing up through school systems. So a lot of healing, listening, and conversation parts that we've been working at our internal work. And then Katie, you can talk a little bit about where we've been going on, maybe about how are we as a school system looking at kind of disrupting the systemic racism that is, just a part of school systems.
Yeah, and so although our internal work is never done, we can't just live in that place, and we had to then talk about what does this look like, feel like, and how can we become a more anti-racist institution, because we know that that's a journey and never a destination. So we talked about, let's start with looking at our MTSS system and what does Tier 1 look like? What does supports look like? How are those practices showing up? And talking with our staff and our leadership and our equity team, which is combined as one team together. So every decision is kind of made through an equity lens, as well as people who are passionate about professional development and learning for students. So all of that is one group and one way that we filter information. And through that group, really talking about what does our grading practices look like? What do our comments that we're putting on report cards look like? Are our biases coming through? Are there unintentional microaggressions occurring? What assumptions are we making about families as a result of that huge permanent communication tool that we're sending home with our families? And so digging deep on that, examining our discipline data and practices, who's being referred, what are they being referred for, why are they being referred, is racism at the heart of these incidents or not, and really having families and students feel heard and acknowledging that racism could be a part of that conflict. Hey, this happened. Do you think race was a part of it? if that's, you know, developmentally appropriate or situationally appropriate, that we're not shying away from those conversations.
I think we added on to that to help our staff, because you don't know when your implicit bias is at play. And so we have a mental model where we'll, like, if you're feeling yourself responding to something with a bigger emotion, that it's like, pause, notice your first thought, because your first thought is often swimming through your biases. Pause and reflect, and then have another thought. Think deeper. What else is at play? So that's kind of a model that we've been trying to use here at school, is just like, notice your first thought, pause, reflect, and then even ask for other people's ideas or thoughts or opinions before we react or respond, especially when it comes to discipline, because we find, you know, who's being referred and by who regarding discipline or behavior is often in that place of just that, what you think students should act like and what you think students should be doing, with often is through a white normative lens. And so being able to retrain people's beliefs around what does joy look like in school, what is completely acceptable ways of living and being in school, and be able to retrain folks to pause and reflect before they respond and do essentially harm to a lot of our students and families through, you know, these being called out at disproportionate rates and not in a justified way. And like Katie was talking about, that's all in our tier 1 level. That's all, like, we've been looking at not only just discipline and being able to do some coaching and training there around our own biases and values and beliefs, but also creating in every classroom a place where kids feel safe, valued, seen, heard. And that comes through our systems and structures and the way that we do school. And so throughout the school, of course, we have, you know, responsive classroom practices where you have morning meetings, you have brain breaks, you have optimistic closing circles. So you have opportunities for kids to share, to hear about each other's intersectionalities, be mirrors and windows for each other, and for teachers to really provide spaces for listening and healing together. Within that, we do shared learning in every classroom for social emotional learning. So common curriculum, common practices there. So we have that. But the shift there that our teams have really looked at is, like, often social emotional learning can be a way for, if you look at it through an anti-racist lens, being mindful that social emotional learning isn't a Band-Aid for folks that are going through harm based on their race or culture or identity, and not giving them coping strategies. So we're really having to look at, like, that's an important skill, but also what is the other layer there, that how does race come into this? And so having that common social emotional learning, common structures for positive supports and celebrations and opportunities for leadership and parent partnership, as well as, like, community within each other, buddy classes, and just student leadership opportunities throughout the school. So we've been working really hard on creating a culture and a place where kids are valued, their identities are valued, they're seen, they're heard, and they're listened to, and they're believed. And that's something we've gotten through feedback before, is kids and families' lived experiences are true, and they're valuable, and they deserve to be listened to and responded to by all of us here at school. And that's been taking us a lot of trust building, a lot of sit downs face to face with families and students, and a lot of them feeling affirmed and heard and listened to, and that folks are here at the school are validating their experience and taking action to kind of make things better and more affirming for their families and their cultures and their identities. Anything else, Katie?
I think the other piece for tier 1 is just kind of really looking at that data to make sure that there aren't kiddos who aren't feeling seen or heard, and talking about, like, okay, who's feeling like they're not being seen or heard or valued, and why is that? And then digging deeper. So it's not just a data point that we collect in a survey. It's now, how do we act upon those pieces to make sure that we're making sure that all students feel a sense of belonging?
Yeah, connecting to that why every time we're together with staff. Those data points are our little tiny humans that are in front of us every single day, and putting faces on that is their experience at school, and every single one of them matter. Some of our ways, one of the hardest things is this work is keeping the momentum, because in education you have so many different things coming at you all the time. To be able, that becomes a new focus. So we make a commitment to have in our school improvement plan a goal around anti-racism every year for the last 3 years and ongoing. So we can continue that work, because you have new staff coming in, or new kids and families coming in. Being able to keep that value of being an anti-racist school and working towards that is so important to be making systemic change in our community.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and I mean, I've seen it with my own kids. I know this year our elementary school started using morning meetings, and it's like my daughter's favorite time of day, because she gets to know her class and her teacher, and just thinking about those opportunities for real connection and relationship building, I think is so important. And I mean, like, and especially when you come down to like family and community connection to those, I mean, those are the same questions we're asking around the dinner table. And I think as a parent, I feel so much more involved in school when I get letters home from teachers when they ask, how are things going? You know, we just got our panorama survey and that kind of stuff going on.
It's I think so important. So I was in a morning meeting just this week where the teacher was talking about Indigenous Peoples Day versus Columbus Day, and be able to have those discussions in a second grade classroom. And the teacher's like, why is this important? And one little guy is like, because oftentimes schools don't always tell the truth, and it's important for us to learn the truth. So the fact that their family has that narrative that school isn't going to tell you what's really going on with all the communities, it's huge. So we've got work to do. So creating those safe spaces and in classrooms to have those in those meetings and be able to talk about race and culture and, like, you know, history that isn't so fabulous to hear is so important to be able to change the dynamic of how school works. So, and with that, I'm not sure, a lot of schools nowadays for parent communication, I know our district is using Parent Square, and that is so fabulous. It's almost like a live stream that you can have back and forth with teachers and families. And we have one teacher, she'll send a picture from something in the classroom every day that's just called dinner conversation. And it's like just a snapshot of something, kids doing something, or some strange object that they're talking about in class. And just that partnership, so valuable to just heal past trauma from families that have gone through our educational systems and have not felt valued and seen, and just helping them and be a part of the school.
Yeah, and we're looking forward to inviting more families now. That in-person volunteering's a thing again, and welcoming families to share their culture with our community.
I love your examples. I think like the effort behind really good stakeholdering, it like the systems framing of like, we're going to have a structure so that we do this on a regular basis to keep momentum is so admirable. And thanks so much for sharing your story for Edmonds. It's great to hear from y'all. And I do want to encourage people, if you want more information, reaching out to them about their experience. And we do have some resources to share, so I want to make sure that we get to those as well. But we hope that the conversation doesn't end here. We would love if people could take this to your leadership team, if you want to grab one of those resources and share it out. Maybe talk with your PLC about what it looks like in your department, or lead a discussion with your students and see what they think about it, or maybe even try that morning meeting plan. We do have, we've had a bunch of different resources kind of mentioned throughout our presentation today. Sarah's resource was Learning for Justice, Responding to Hate and Bias in School. This is a really good toolkit if you want to check that out. It's got good guidance around timelines and that kind of thing. There is a series of pages related to equity and civil rights that I just want to recommend. Responding to discrimination complaints is one of those, as well as complaints and concerns. So checking those out, really great resources on there and support. So if you're feeling stuck, check that out and get in contact. We have a link for Tanya's data, and we also have the Puget Sound ESD racial equity tool that is pretty cool. And just those questions, again, check them out. We have a transformational relationship and partnership framework, which is a great thing for your leadership team to look at together and to think about kind of a systems lens. We also had an anti-racist social and emotional learning brief, and I'm trying to remember, was that from you, Dua? Do you want to talk about it for a second?
Can you repeat the question? Sorry.
It's the anti-racist social and emotional learning brief. I think that was from you.
I don't think that was from me.
Oh, maybe it wasn't. Maybe it was from someone else. There's also our special education department has a newsletter. It's pretty rad. You should check that. And so if you aren't subscribed yet, subscribe. And Edmonds mentioned they have there was a book that was helpful to them. It's Culturally Responsive Teaching in the Brain. It's by Zaretta Hammond. If you haven't read it yet, it's a really interesting book, and I think it challenges you. So we have some websites listed from our various presenters. There's also a funding guide. We have a newsletter as well. Our Engage newsletter comes out towards the beginning of the month. We have really cool articles, usually related to our webinar themes, and resources in there, as well as leadership team activities. So if you're ever curious about what are some good leadership activities, those are in there as well. Next month, we're going to be talking about leadership moves for promoting inclusion. We are so excited. We're going to have Katie Novak with us, and she's one of the authors behind Universal Design for Learning. She's an amazing speaker. So if you haven't heard of UDL yet, it's such a beautiful vision of what school could be. And yeah, it'll be worth your time to check her out as well. And then if you've enjoyed our webinars, we really want to encourage you to share the registration link from our resource sheet with your colleagues who might be interested. We like to get the word out about best practices and just highlight districts who are really doing the work. We do have an evaluation before y'all go. And we're going to put that in the chat. We also have a longer form graduation equity webinar feedback survey. So if you want to tell us which presenters and give us a little bit more information, you can actually type instead of just doing the bubble test and the evaluation we have right here. You can go to that as well. And it's linked in all of our webinar kind of communications. It's also on our page. So if you ever want to drop us a line, it's in there. We would love to see you get some clock hours for joining us. So if you join live, you've already registered for the year through Zoom. You'll also need to register for clock hours monthly in PD Enroller. PD Enroller will send you an evaluation for your email, and then we'll verify your attendance, and then we release your hours. So if you're watching this video later, the process changes a little bit. You register each month for clock hours in PD Enroller, and then you complete the evaluation that they'll send you. And you'll also do our graduation equity webinar feedback survey, and that just signals us that you watched them. And we'll verify your attendance every couple of weeks, and then we release your hours that way. And if you have questions about this, please email Ronnie Larson. She does our clock hour supports. Thanks so much for joining us today, and we will see you next month.
Hey, Kathy, can I ask one question from the chat?
Absolutely.
Folks were wondering if there's a mechanism for them to get the PowerPoint slides and not just the PDF so they can use it in their own trainings?
Yes. I'm going to put my email in the chat and y'all can email me if you want some slides. How about that? Yay. Yes. Thank you, everybody, and have a wonderful Wednesday, and we'll see you next month.